Hey everybody, welcome to the afternoon session of AMA Junior Camp here at the International Air Modeling Center in Muncie, Indiana at AMA HQ. I'm your host, Claire, and I'm joined by Kyle Jarris and our good friend, Red Jensen.
Hey, everybody.
So this session of AMA Junior Camp is open to everybody. It's not just for the campers that signed up for the morning sessions. So anybody can participate, watch, and ask Red questions about his career at NASA. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty excited about that. So the first thing I want to ask you, Red, is where do you work and what do you do?
Yeah, good morning. First, thanks for having me. And I'm sorry this isn't in person. I really had hoped to be part of Camp AMA and be there to talk to everybody live. That'd be cool. But next best thing, I guess, right?
Yep.
Definitely.
So I work at NASA Armstrong Flight Research Center on Edwards Air Force Base, and I run the Dale Reed Subscale Flight Research Lab. And I'm chief pilot for all of the unmanned stuff, for pilot proficiency and checkout for all of NASA Armstrong, as well as JPL, with the exception of Global Hawk. So just about anything that unmanned that flies, I have some part of it.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. That's really exciting.
It's a modeler's dream come true for sure.
Well, that actually brings me to my first question. What was your first introduction to air modeling, and how old were you? And do you remember the plane you flew? Do you remember the feeling you had that first time?
I remember a ton of it. I can't tell you my first introduction because my father was a modeler, and my very earliest memories are of that. But I soloed at 6 years old on a plane called a Mini Mambo. Had an OS-20, a little two-stroke motor in it, and a Futaba, the old black case 4NBL, simple 4-channel. I don't even know if it had servo reversing. It may have. But yeah, I remember that day well. And that was sort of the day that I guess you could say that it started my pilot career. But honestly, I'd been around modeling and flying long before that. But that was just the first day that I was successful on my own.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh.
So that's, I guess, not to date myself, but that's 43 years or so of aero modeling so far.
Wow. That is fantastic. Hey, it looks like we already have a viewer question. What are the planes in the background there, Red?
Well, you're gonna have to pick because there's a few.
Pick your favorite.
So my well, that's too tough. I like
I was trying to narrow it down.
Yeah, my interests range from indoor free flight all the way through turbine jets and absolutely everything in between. If it flies, I think it's so. The one right over my shoulder here, let's see, I'm backwards here. That's called a Mini Avanti, and that's a turbine jet. It's relatively small. It weighs about 12 pounds. I used to be into the giant airplane thing, did that a lot, with the whole trailer and, take them to the field and all that stuff, which is really cool. But I honestly...
We get a lot of guys like that out here.
Carting them around. So this, I can put a hole in my truck and take it and fly it. A couple of the smaller ones here. Let me see if I can grab one. Like this is about as simple of RC model as you can get. This is it's called a Micro Aquila. This is actually my own design, sort of. It's a recreation of a 1980s era sailplane that I shrunk down to a 30-inch wingspan.
I love that. Oh my gosh.
And it just runs, the little tiny park zone bricks from like the UMX planes. I put them in there. And I have a laser cutter, so I design and cut nearly almost all my own stuff. I'm not an avid scratch builder, but this is an airplane from my youth that was very high performance for its time, and I couldn't afford it, so I never had one. Until I did this one. So this sort of scratches the vintage itch for me. And then the other black one there is my son's, same airplane.
Oh my gosh. I love that so much, the color scheme. It is very 80s. I think that's just fantastic. Totally. What a great little plane.
Now, is that polyhedral on there on both of them, or was it just your son's that has the polyhedral?
No, They both do. It's dihedral and then polyhedral. So
okay.
That's true to the real one, I guess you could say. It's can't see much, but the radio gear is actually underneath the wing there. It's just one of those little bricks. Yeah.
It's a model
Ways-
of a model.
That is totally. I've done that for a while. I've shrunk. I think this is my sixth one that I've shrunk airplanes from my youth. It's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Oh my goodness, we have a previous panelist in the chat. We have our friend AJ Jaffe.
I was waiting for it.
What are all those planes sitting on there, Red?
Yeah, that's a loaded
Interesting
question.
table.
So, my interests are varied. Obviously, I love anything that flies. I'm a full-scale pilot as well. But my dream and my passion has been air racing. It's extended into aero modeling quite a bit. I've done quite a bit of racing there too. But been going to the Reno air races since 1969, my first year. So you can do the math there. I missed a couple in between, but I've always wanted to race Formula One. I'm on a Formula One team now. I crew chief for a couple of airplanes. But the great thing behind me, I can maybe show it a little bit, is that's a Formula One airplane of my own design that I'm currently building. That's the fuselage plug, and I'm pulling molds from it. Perhaps if we have a little time later, I can drag one of the molds over here and maybe show the guys what it looks like. It's a big model airplane. If anybody's ever done any composite work or any molding on their own, it's exactly the same thing. It's the exact same process. So that felt within reach to me. It really became a reality when I worked at NASA because while I'm comfortable with all the aerodynamic stuff, I'm not comfortable with structures. So when I decided to do this, I told myself the number one rule is don't die, and then don't kill
That's a good
anybody
rule.
else.
I mean, just generally speaking.
and have fun. So working at NASA has put me in touch with some folks that are super smart with structure, and they've helped with this, and other folks as well. But that's really the last piece of the puzzle for me.
That's awesome. Well, it looks like we have another question from another panelist, Mason Hutchison. He's asking,
another
Red,
loaded.
I want to hear your favorite AMA Expo story.
Oh
I mean,
man,
I would
there's
love to
been
hear that too.
That we can share in a family-friendly manner.
so many good times. Yeah, actually, Mason was part of my favorite story. My favorite story was not this last year, but the year prior. I think it was Saturday night after the show closed. We'd all brought foamies, and we were outside the expo hall flying foamies. In the evening, they had lights on them, that sort of thing. Just hanging out with friends. No agenda, no answering questions, none of that kind of stuff. But flying in the evening. That for me, air modeling is hugely social. I get excited to fly, but I don't not sleep the night before and get overly crazy for it like I used to. The passion's still there for sure, but for me, it's seeing and talking and hanging out with my friends. That's the big deal. That's what I really like.
Aww,
so that's one of my favorite stories. A bunch of my good friends together that I don't always get to see. Hanging out, just having fun, doing what we all love.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. I love that. Well, my next question for you, Red, is how do you incorporate model aviation in your day-to-day work?
It's everything in my day-to-day work.
Okay, next
the
question.
aircraft.
No, just kidding.
Well, the aircraft that we fly are more like model aircraft than they're not. There are complex systems on board, autopilot, different sensors, things like that. But the very basic part of it is a model aircraft. We use model aircraft servos, engines, covering, depends on what's going on. It's all very similar stuff. The biggest difference is you can't operate with the see what happens attitude. You've got to make sure that everything is right, ready to go to do the job. So, our job is to facilitate research. So our aircraft are tools, and they're maintained and operated in such a way that it's not very unlike an airline, for instance, or some other military type organization. Regular maintenance periods, complete flight plans, checklists, all that kind of stuff. So it's not really kind of go out and see what happens. It's very regimented. But as far as the aero modeling part of it, it's been absolutely invaluable because nobody knows these types of aircraft better than somebody who's done it their whole life or even a great period of their life. So when we hire people, for instance, I don't care if you're a straight A student. I don't care if you're an Eagle Scout. The first thing I want to see is piloting experience and a wide variety of vehicles. that's really what we look for, and that we have a hard time finding people that are qualified to operate these vehicles that can weigh 300-400 pounds.
Yeah, that's something AJ mentioned yesterday, was kind of the weight of these vehicles, and that you're viewing these as small aircraft, and in my mind 300-400 pounds is huge, and just the different perspectives, but also the idea that these are tools that you kind of switch and take what you know from that model aircraft experience and do your job right with these tools.
Absolutely.
And you're flying them a little bit differently than we would be at the flying field.
Yep, for sure. And one of the things that that is hard to get across to people is that there's probably 100 people watching this podcast right now that could do the flying portion of my job, no problem. Right? There's a ton of skilled people out there. Difference comes is it in your decision making. First of all, you got to have a professional mindset, right? So no screwing around, everything's right, all that kind of stuff. Which is cool, no problem with that. But when something goes wrong, the decisions you make. So my job technically is a safety pilot. So we have all these systems on board doing various things, and my job is when those things break and don't work right, because they're all research, right? They're not stuff that you buy and go use. It's not Windows, right?
It's a beta test.
Yeah. So when it goes wrong, you're expected to be able to number one, keep everybody safe. Number two, save the aircraft, right? Really what it comes down to. So you're a human override for all of these systems. So the decision-making process that goes into that is really critical, and it's a certain mindset and a certain background, on top of the obviously above-average piloting skills. So.
For sure. So, out of curiosity, how often are you required to initiate that kind of a sequence, to jump in, take control, and save both your coworkers and the people around you and the aircraft?
Well, thankfully not that often, because there's a lot of things in place to keep that from getting to that point, right? But when it happens, it's like you don't think about it, you just do it. And
we're all acquainted with Murphy,
right? So what we do is we don't get to do it that often, but we train for it all the time. So it's just a procedure to take control away from the autopilot. Upset recovery is part of our check rides, unusual attitudes, all that kind of stuff. So our fleet of pilots have to maintain proficiency and currency, and that's part of the very minimum an annual check ride, and more than likely, a phase check every 6 months, something like that.
Cool. Henry Amberson jumped in with a quick question here. What education did you have for your job behind high school? What school did you go to, and what program?
So I went to Montgomery High School in Santa Rosa, California. And I have an education of a lifetime of doing it wrong. I don't have any college degree. It's 100% aero modeling. And I really mean this from the bottom of my heart. Everything that I know is due to aero modeling. Every question that I had, every answer that I got came out of, building, flying, talking to people, reading plans, model airplane magazines, and the thirst for knowledge. So, I got my education playing with toys. I never figured it would pay off. Here I am.
It worked out.
Yeah, it's not the way I would recommend doing it at all. But, here it is. Problem with like mine, while the flying part is familiar, the rest of the programming and the software and the integration, all the other stuff that goes along with it, it's not taught in any college course. There are some folks now doing a UAV type certificate or maybe even a degree, but mostly in management, not necessarily in the technical part. And it's so wide and varied that you just get experience. It's the only way you're going to get it. And it's tough to get that experience.
Yeah.
It's so great that you're able to use your hobby for your career. Like, that's
it's pretty
dream,
awesome.
Right?
Yeah, it is. I always joke, well, I don't really joke, it's really true. I don't have to go to work, I get to go to work. And I mean that. It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, there's a lot of great guys on the team there. Everybody that you work alongside of. I had the honor, I'll say, of meeting at Expo at the last one, and it was just a really cool group of guys to be able to kind of jump in and have some brief conversations with, but to really witness from the outside looking in what a great group there is there. So.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. Everybody gets along really well. Everybody gets it, that's the big thing. Again, there's a lot of fantastic pilots out there, but there's that extra something that you can't really teach, but when you see it, you know it, and you grab it. And we try to do.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Red, I have a quick question for you. It's not on my list. It's just something I thought of just now. What is the coolest thing that's happened to you on the job that you're allowed to talk about?
I can talk about 99% of the stuff. We don't do a whole lot of secret stuff. There is some, but I can't tell you about that. But the coolest thing, now, here's the truth. I grew up reading about Edwards Air Force Base and NASA and the NHCA and all this flight tests and Chuck Yeager and all this stuff. Because I was fascinated with it. And, through a fortunate set of circumstances, here I am at the very same place that it's happened. And, what I thought when I got there is if I can witness something cool that I can tell my kids about, something, notable, obviously there's no X-15 anymore or any of that kind of stuff going on, but, something that, made the headlines that, oh yeah, I saw that. Well, little did I know that when I got there, the chief scientist at the time, Al Bowers, which I'm sure the AMA viewership is well aware of, had been studying this flying wing problem for some 20 years. And they had a subscale model they were flying, having some problems with. And, I was eager to help. I'm like, I just want to do everything because I was so excited to be there. Still am. And, we ended up flying this model. And I think it was maybe a month after I had been there, we demonstrated this, non-elliptical lift distribution and proverse yaw, which means that the aircraft flies in coordinated flight without not only any yaw control, but no vertical service. So this is kind of a big deal. It's why birds don't have vertical tails. Well, not long after we started collecting data that proved our theory, the Smithsonian Institution called us and requested to have that very airplane that I flew for their collection to possibly be put on display at some point. So I'm like, already this is like,
That's
what?
awesome.
Yeah. So that's there's so many cool things, but that one really sticks out for me.
That's fantastic.
And you
oh
can
my goodness.
A follow-on to that airplane is currently on display at the California Science Center. So if anybody's out on the West Coast,
I love that
let's see.
place.
Yeah, there's an airplane that I built and flew in there, and not by myself. I had some help, but there it is, kind of cool.
That's fantastic. We have a pretty cool question, I think, from our friend Mason. He says, I've always been impressed with NASA's Model Labs public outreach. Can you tell us more?
Mason, I'm telling you more right now.
I know that's how you get, Mason.
No, he's right. Public outreach is a big part of NASA. And, somebody once said that 10% of my job is public outreach. So that's why, I get to do things I love talking to people because ultimately I end up talking to somebody that likes airplanes like I do. And that's just talking to a friend. So I love it. And, but we do all kinds of stuff. So I'm fortunate enough to be able to do things like AMA Expo, this sort of thing, plus lots of other things around. The biggest challenge is that, we'd love to support them all. Obviously we can. Is the late request. Always a really cool request like 2 weeks or a month before. And I'm like, I'd love to do that, but I just can't. So you guys know from the behind the scenes stuff how long it takes to set this up. I just wish I could do more.
You guys don't know how much work we put into getting Red on this camp, for real.
It's tough. It's tough.
Worth it. It's worth it, though.
Well, thank you.
Well, and we still hope to see you at the physical camp AMA coming up next year. So long as we can make the schedules work and get the red tape figured.
We'll keep working that. I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Let's answer an easy question. This is from Son of a Firefighter. What does NASA stand for?
Well, the public, there's a bunch of jokes out there.
I was going to say, which one?
National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So we always say that we're the first A in NASA. So Edwards Air Force Base and NASA Armstrong is purely aeronautics. We do very little space stuff, which NASA is mostly known for space stuff. But there's a ton of aero research that goes on, and we're really at the forefront of it.
Red, can you explain how aeronautical research kind of translates into space travel for us?
Well, there's crossovers. There's all kinds of stuff. Right now, the big thing, or happened for a long time, is returning from space land in a controlled fashion. So for years, you'd splash down in a capsule, right? And then we had the space shuttle. We also had series of vehicles called lifting bodies. And the whole idea is that you can use the same vehicle that you're in space with to fly down from a wing-borne landing instead of splashing down in the ocean, which is, well, frankly, fraught with peril for obvious reasons. But it costs a lot because you have to have a Navy out looking for you. You have to, clear the range of any non-participant. And if you can come back and land at a terrestrial, land-based location, you can save a ton of money, and you can increase your flight rate, which is what it's all about. So you get more people in space for longer periods of time, and more flights. So the aeronautics part of that has been the research between the space and the air, and how to work between them. So there's still quite a bit of research going on in that area.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Tracy jumped in with a quick clarification question. What's the plane of yours that's at the Cal Science Center? They go there a lot.
It's called Prandtl 3. And so it's a big white thing with red and blue stripe. It's a giant flying wing. So if you go in, Tracy, I've been there to see it. If you go up the escalators, right at the top of the escalators, just to the left, it's hanging up there.
You sound like me when I'm describing where airplanes are at the National Model Aviation Museum. I'm like, all right, so you're going to go forward, you're going to turn left, and there is the Nobler right there. Oh, Pete, let's see. Have you ever flown a space model? Jada Johnson just asked.
Well, a space shuttle model, no. Well, sort of. I built a home one years ago. But I will say more relevant, these past several years, an outgrowth of this Prandtl project, which is the same flying wing I was just talking about with Al Bowers and that kind of stuff, is a much smaller all-flying wing model that we are trying to fly on Mars. So we've been doing aerodynamic research into controllability and all these other things. Currently, we have them as small as a 13-inch wingspan, and they're fully autonomous, although we fly them manually.
Yeah.
I suspect it's going to end up somewhere around the 18-inch wingspan range because of, one, the sensors we've got to pack on board. We've got to get a reasonable wing loading, physical space, all these different constraints that are required for this. So that's probably the closest thing I've come to flying a space shuttle model, I guess you could say.
Awesome. Let's see what other questions we have going on. A lot of people are really curious about the big airplane behind you.
So this is a full-scale pattern for a Formula One aircraft. It's upside down. That's why it looks weird. Let's see if I can get it out of the way and you can see the canopy there. So there's a canopy. Right. So it looks kind of weird.
I think it looks
It's
awesome.
upside down.
Yeah,
that
it's
helps
upside
the
down.
people. Yeah.
So that's my own design Formula One full-scale airplane that I intend to race at Reno someday, maybe as soon as I don't know. I'm hoping to fly it by next year. We'll see what happens. I don't know.
That's awesome. Oh, we have a question from Irina. What inspired you to work for NASA? Scott Kelly was inspired by the right stuff.
That's a funny story. I never once thought I would end up at NASA. I never aspired to work at NASA. It was always something I read about, something I admired, something that was out there but not physically attainable for me. It turns out that I used to work for another UAV company, and we would have to enter airspace to fly our vehicles for testing. So we were a DoD sort of supplier, doing military hardware, and we got to we got to use the NASA airspace quite a bit. It was first through somebody else, another project, and then on our own. And eventually we were down there flying, 3 to 4 times a year. So I got to know some of the folks down there, and they called and said, hey, our model lab, the person who's there is not well. They're very sick, haven't been back to work in a year, and we're looking for somebody to take over the model lab. And are you interested? And I, of course, said no. I'm not interested at all. Actually, I had a great job. I wasn't. I thought I had it all, and I did. I had a great job. But eventually, it took honestly over a year to convince me to consider it. And once I did, I left on good terms with the other job, and here's where I'm at, and I love it. I jokingly say I'll die here. Hopefully not at my desk, but this is where I live. It's where I'm going to be for the rest of my career, as far as I can tell. And the thing I like most about it is it's different every day, and it's research. You're doing something new all the time, which parallels my air modeling in that I'm a designer. I love to design and build and craft build, so I'm always doing something new. The repetitive thing, I don't do that very well at all. So, the previous job, we had a product that we were developing, and it worked, and people bought it, which was cool. But then we had to make 100 of them. So, that was like, I'm not into that. And I was traveling all over the world, usually averaging about 2 weeks a month from home. I have a family, so that's tough. And they don't, I don't get to go to Hawaii or Tahiti. I go to some sandbox where it's not good, So it was pretty easy to make the decision once I finally thought about it and really wrap my head around it. So.
Well, that's some of the really cool stuff about model aviation and even full scale aviation, but maybe more so in model aviation, in that you can really explore so many different avenues and aspects, and do so with fairly limited cost investiture. But there's so much to learn, and at least for me, I don't consider myself an expert in any one genre of flight or anything like that. But dabbling in all these different things, with the exception, I will say, of helicopters. I don't fly helis. AJ was ribbing on me a little bit the other day, but
I went sideways on helis for a while too. I got into really crazy. I got into helicopter drag racing, which is like the most niche thing you could think of.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. It's fun.
Well, this is coming from the Formula One guy, so
yeah.
We had a kind of a fun question here from Irina. What is the work environment, such as workers in office, like? What is it like to work at NASA? Is it like a cube farm? Here at AMA, people want to come on tours of HQ, and I'm like, no, you want to go to the museum. The museum is the cool place. This is just a bunch of cubes.
Yeah. So NASA in general is absolutely a cube farm. There are tons of engineers and technicians and folks, all the different places, but within that cube farm, there are labs, and the labs is where they do the physical hands-on work, in addition to like the hangars where they're working on aircraft, things like that. So I actually work in a lab. There are 4 of us, and we have one office that we all sit, we all have a desk there. They're not walled off or anything. We all talk to each other. But then out onto the shop floor is all essentially hangar space and workshop area. So NASA is very compartmentalized. Typically, if you work there, you're in propulsion, or you're in aero, or you're in structures, or you're in, heat transfer, or any one of these very specialized things. And where we work in the lab, we have to sort of encompass all these different things. We're capable of taking something as simple as a napkin sketch and turning it into a complete flying vehicle. So we're do the design, the construction, the integration, and the operation all in one area. So we have to sort of wear all these different hats. And I'm gonna plug aero modeling again. I learned how to solder because of aero modeling. I learned how to code because of an Arduino. I'm not very good at it, but I know the basics. All these different things that aero modeling taught me to eventually prepare me to work at NASA, where the things that I take for granted, like servos and C rating and ESCs and iron-on covering and control horns, all this different stuff, is completely foreign to 99% of the people at NASA, right? And you look at some of these problems, especially when I got there, I'm like, why can't they make this fly? That's way screwed up. I can fix that today. And you do, and then all of a sudden, you're getting meaningful results. You've got all these flying projects, and you grow. So in a little over 7 years now, it went from me by myself to 4 full-time guys. We're trying to hire a 5th at some point, and we're working with dozens of projects and aircraft and different things. So it's really rewarding to be able to take that toy background, right, and apply it to something that makes a difference in people's lives. I think that's pretty cool.
Definitely
that is really cool.
There is a quick question. Jarjuzi Kid said, do you have a YouTube channel? So I thought I'd ask that one.
I do. I don't do much on it, but it's just Red Jensen. And it's mostly a showcase for some of the little kit designs that I do. I'm not good at it. So don't have too high expectations. But yeah, there's some there. I should
Cool.
do more.
We have a question from Jarjuzi Kids. What's the biggest project you've ever worked on in your life and career? That's a pretty broad question, but go for it.
The family might count. I don't know, but
That's some work. Like physically largest, or the longest running, or the most
You know
money,
what you
or
choose.
Huh.
Panelist choice.
Yeah. So, gosh, it's really hard to say. I've been involved with some big airplanes. I did some movie work and some commercials and things like that. That was all really fun. Again, I'll probably have to say the Crandall project, purely from the standpoint of it was unknown, and we were actually learning things that were brand new. That was really cool, really eye-opening. I've gotten to fly some pretty incredible aircraft in support of our warfighters. So the previous job I had, nothing was weaponized. It was purely looking at things, cameras and things like that. And so I got to fly some stuff and be in some situations that made a difference. And that ranks pretty high up there too.
That's awesome.
But you know what? I'm so dumb. I can get the most fun out of the smallest, tiniest little airplane or the largest thing. It's all, it's not relevant to me. It's just fun. So
it's fun in its own way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're,
awesome.
Just after the last expo, we spent days on this. We're cutting up tiny little slivers of foam sheet to make walk-along gliders, where you walk and you hold your hands up and fly.
I've done the walk-along gliders.
Yeah, so we actually did a whole research project on how to make these things fly as slow as possible, and we developed this tiny little foam thing that had these leading-edge turbulators on it. It was really this complicated thing, but it flew so slow, like you could just walk with it, and it would, off of your head or your hands or whatever. My coworker Justin, he's clearly the master. He's much better walk-along glider pilot than I am, but it was a lot of fun. But one of the engineers had a question, and we started talking about it, and we spent a couple days and sort of figured it out. So that's the simplest airplane you can imagine. It's just a tiny sheet of foam, a paper plane almost. But there's still things to learn from that, and that's what I find exciting. It's what drives me every day.
I love the mental image of NASA scientists playing with the walk-along gliders, because I do that all the time. There are days when all I do is build paper airplanes or mess with some new model, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a rocket scientist.
When I was a kid, I loved airplanes. I also loved building balsa wood. We call them gliders. About 8 or 10 inch spans, something like that. And that taught me more about trimming an airplane and incident and decollage and washout and airfoils and wingtip design and all this kind of stuff. Really more than anything else I've done in the beginning, because you can iterate so quickly. You can try things and you can change it and you can make modifications and learn what works and what doesn't work. And pretty soon you realize that little tiny model translates to the largest man-carrying airplane. It's exactly the same thing.
That's what I tell people every day. Oh my gosh. Okay, I have been validated by NASA. So, kids on my field trips, you better watch out. I have been confirmed by NASA that I'm right.
All the same principles, there are other variables involved, but airplanes fly because airplanes fly. It doesn't change whether it's tiny or large.
Yeah, no matter what the scale is. Oh my gosh, Red, we're like on the same page. This is
cool.
That is fantastic. Well, we're coming up on the kind of closer to the end of the panel for the afternoon. And Red, I really wanted to ask you an important question. I've been asking all of the panelists this, and I want you to give me your honest answer. And my question is, what advice do you have for model aviation enthusiasts, like everybody watching today, our campers, everyone who is a camper at heart? How can they apply their passion to their future career?
Well, that's a great question. And, in my time at NASA, we give tours all the time, and I speak to young folks and old folks alike, and they all ask a very similar question. And I always play a little game with them, and I ask them that I want you to think about a job that you think that NASA doesn't do, right? What do you think that NASA doesn't do? And, I won't drag it out, but the answer is, there's nearly a place for everybody at NASA, no matter what you do, from a gardener to an architect, to a doctor, to a lawyer, to a finance person, to a veterinarian, to a nutritionist. All of these different disciplines that you would not traditionally associate with NASA are at NASA. So the biggest thing that you have to do to go further in your career or even to work at NASA is have the desire to do that. If you have the want to do that, and you're capable, everything else will really fall into place. The biggest thing is to listen and to learn. Working at NASA has taught me more about people skills, honestly, than anything else. There's all these different personalities you work with, and we're all a big team. So it's figuring out the strengths of people and utilizing them when you can, and everybody goes further together.
That's awesome, Red. Thank you. That is the perfect answer. That's exactly what I was looking for there. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us with Red Jensen here at AMA Junior Camp on Wednesday, July 8th, 2020 at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Red, I really appreciate you being here, talking to us, talking to the kids. I just have one final question for you.
Sure.
Can I go to space camp?
Yeah, it just costs money.
Can I be a camp counselor for space camp? I'll do that.
Wouldn't that be cool? Well, I'd like to.
That's the job for me.
Extend the invite. If you guys are ever out this way, give me a little bit of notice, and I'd be happy to give you a tour and show you around a little bit more behind the scenes. Likewise for the campers out there, if somebody has questions or whatever, get a hold of Kyle or Claire, and they can relay them to me, and be happy to chat.
Yeah,
Check out my YouTube channel. Like and subscribe, right? That's
it. Feel free to email me, education@modelaircraft.org. Send me your questions for Red, and I will forward them on to him. I'll get them right to him. So everybody, just as a reminder, we have been live, and we've been answering your questions live. If you're watching this at a later date, just email me, education@modelaircraft.org. And again, I will send your questions out to Red, and we'll see what he has to say. Thanks, everybody.
It's a lot of fun, man. See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. See ya.